Is it on? Oh, hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, we're a little bit late. Some technical difficulties this morning getting our little iPhone there set up. Welcome back. We are finishing up our month of labor, talking about labor, and we wanted to talk today, our plan today was to talk about comfort measures and to review some comfort measures, but we have found some other fantastic, really in-depth resources that we're going to let you know about and send you along that way. So we thought today we'd maybe answer some questions, and well, we have a big question for you guys. So for those of you who have had babies, who are watching and who've had babies already, if you can think about the support that you got in labor, what was most useful and what was least useful for you for support in labor. So today we're going to talk about, we're still going to talk about comfort measures, but we're going to touch on a few little different things and breathe through the pain. Thanks, Stephanie. That was not nice. Good demonstration. One of the questions that comes up often is from partners or from people who are asking for their partners about how to support them in labor. There are some really great resources out there to check out. There is The Birth Partner, which is a tried and true book. It's gone through many editions. How many so far?
A lot.
A lot. And
it's a great book.
It's a really, really great book. But there are some basic points that we wanted to pull out for comfort measures from a partner's perspective. Do you want to talk about those, Becky?
Sure. So partners know the laboring person the best of anybody in the room. So knowing what she or that person likes and what makes them comfortable is really in your wheelhouse. Not talking and pestering people while they're in labor is really important. So we've talked about that a little bit before in that,
silly questions.
Yeah, don't ask silly questions. People will be blunt when they're in labor. They'll tell you what they're thinking and what they need, and they need to be in that space to feel safe to do that. So when you're touching someone, giving firm pressure and not lightly, rapidly stroking them is really important.
But that often happens because, especially if it's a first birth, the people who are supporting the laboring woman often are nervous and don't know what to do, and so will unwillingly kind of create discomfort. My mom, who hopefully isn't watching this, I don't think so, is a prime example. So she really, really wanted to be supportive and was there during my first birth, and she asked me every 5 minutes, are you going to hate your husband forever for this? Are you going to have any more? Like, do you want to blame him for pain? Do you want to? And she just kept asking the questions. I think she struggled with support in her labor because it was a different generation and different types of support. But the incessant questions,
nervous habits, and then they can't stop. So that's
you're right. This the quick stroking often happens. I think that the number one rule of thumb, and Daphne can speak to this. The number one rule of thumb for partners is presence. Your presence and your focus. So sitting in another room, watching TV, sleeping when your partner is really needing you, probably aren't really great ways to support the laboring
person. Conversation about kitchen supplies.
Or conversation about kitchen supplies.
While your partner's in transition.
But these are things that women remember. These are stories. I've heard countless stories of how people have lived that, and these are the memories they carry, especially in C-sections. I find too. When my partner was talking to the surgeon about hunting, and not necessarily an appropriate thing. But so presence, that love and presence is what you can offer that nobody else can. You know your partner, you know their needs, but you can also advocate for them too. Oftentimes the conversations being had between couples or families about what the goals and ideals are for the upcoming birth, and so reminding somebody who's struggling about what they had wanted can be helpful when it's in a supportive and gentle way. There are also times when plans need to change, and so sometimes being able to support your partner in those changes is a really important thing. So there are lots of ways physically to help partners. One of the things I really like about being able to make a labor more efficient and help cope with discomfort is movement. And so partners can be really great at encouraging movement, at dancing with their loved ones in the living room or in the hospital room, wherever you are, to help labor progress, holding them up, helping them to get up into the washroom and to move around, or helping them to change positions. Lots of physical contact. What we know about physical contact and about intimacy in labor is that it increases our oxytocin. Oxytocin is what's needed for those good, strong, regular contractions. And so not being afraid to connect and to be intimate and to hold your partner, or that nice kind of firm touch that you were talking about, Becky. These are all really important things to think of as you prepare for your upcoming birth. What else? Partners are really great at getting things. Mm-hmm. So making sure the water glass is full, making sure that snacks are around and available. And you don't necessarily need to ask continuously, hey, do you want some water now? Is it time for some water? You just put it in front of them. They will tell you. They will just drink it. Yeah. Or push it out of the way, or tell you not now, and that's great. But having that readily available is always really nice.
Mm-hmm. And especially at home, you know where things are, and we don't. So
yeah.
So you can be quite useful.
Sometimes we root through people's cupboards and closets looking for things. So
often, even. Not just sometimes.
So it's really nice to have that somebody around who knows at least where they're getting stuff. Other uses for partners.
Filling up the pool.
Filling up the birth pool if you're planning a water birth at home. Filling up, making sure that the pool is ready to go maybe before things get good and strong.
Right.
She's working on that. Do we have any suggestions pouring in? No. All right, we've got someone in the background monitoring our comments today, so that we can kind of help answer some of these things. So let's move on. So we're not going to go into much depth about any particular comfort measure, but what we are going to do, we'll touch base on some of the different ways to help support women in a non-pharmacological way, so without using medication. And one of the ways that's really helpful in preparing for this is the way we understand kind of pain and the use of pain, the usefulness of pain in some situations. So when we're not talking about birth and we're talking about pain and discomfort, often it means that something's wrong, something's going on, and so we want to be able to fix it. But what we know about pain and discomfort in birth is that it can be useful. We can work with it. And it's a different kind of pain and a different reason for the pain. So some women find that a little bit easier to cope with. Our physiological response to pain outside of birth is a protective mechanism. And so, if you hurt yourself, our body tries to protect that area. So we usually kind of tense up. Yes. Contract. Our muscles contract. Our heart rate goes up. And so we kind of fold into ourselves to be able to protect ourselves from that pain, which is a bit counterintuitive in labor. A really important thing in labor is to allow the pain to be there, or allow the discomfort to be there. And I want to throw in there, not every person experiences labor and birth as painful. Mm-hmm. There are quite a few people out there who would describe intensity in the labor and birth process, but not necessarily and not specifically pain, which is really quite interesting. And so we can talk to ourselves, and we can tell ourselves a different story when we start falling into the struggle piece of discomfort.
So Ashley and Letitia were commenting on back pressure and massage as being super helpful, and I was thinking we should probably talk about the gate control theory of pain management. I can talk about that.
Yeah, you can do that.
Sorry, I was late. I was returning a page. So the gate control theory basically is that your brain can only conduct so many signals at one time. So your nervous system has a bit of a max capacity. So if you are having very uncomfortable sensations in one part of your body and you create positive sensations in another part of your body, then it kind of blocks out some of that difficult or painful or uncomfortable sensation. So we can achieve this in many different ways. Using a TENS machine is one thing that can be very helpful, particularly if you start using it earlier in your labor, and then ramp it up as the labor progresses. And massage and counter pressure are helpful for other reasons in addition to the gate control theory, but also because that positive sensation blocks some of the pain sensation. And almost all of the, pretty much any of the comfort measures that include touch are relevant. So including things like water immersion. So for lots of these things, there's other reasons why they're helpful. But one of the reasons is that they just compensate a little bit or block out some of the painful stimulation.
Water immersion. So we know that there's lots of research out there on the benefits of water immersion in labor, or hydrotherapy in labor, which can include even being in a nice hot shower with focused kind of water pressure on the lower back, or soaking in a bathtub. One of the things I like talking about when it comes to choosing between water birth or land birth is I usually ask the question, what do you do when you're not feeling that great, or when you're sore, it's been a long day? And a lot of people will soak in a bath. A lot of people will just get into a bathtub and soak and put the day away and let all of their muscles relax. And so this can be really, really, really helpful in labor. Most hospital rooms will have decent bathtubs for soaking. Most homes will have decent bathtubs for soaking, or a birth pool can also be really helpful for that. You can always generally find a shower too if there isn't a bath. And there's a good timing for that. So sometimes if the labor isn't quite going yet and we're still in that early labor phase, if you go back a couple of episodes and you're still in that early labor phase, then soaking in a bath can help you to relax and get a break from some of the contractions and take a rest if needed. But it can slow things down if it relaxes you a bit much. So, but using water immersion in active labor tends not to slow the labor down. Some of the research says that it increases our ability to use the oxytocin in our bodies, and so there might be somewhat of a quickening effect, but I think the research stated maybe a maximum of 6 minutes in difference. So 6 minutes isn't a whole lot of time, but when you're living it, 6 minutes might feel like a really long time.
So I've asked online whether people have experiences that of things that were not helpful. So Megan has commented on the downside. So first, Megan commented about a hip squeeze being practically blissful, and absolutely that can be incredibly helpful during birth. And then she comments on the downside. I'm glad my mother-in-law accidentally showed up during the birth of my second. She was not initially invited because she's such a nervous Nelly. And I can distinctly remember her nervous chatting as I was crowning. And I kept getting out of my good thought process and pushing because I kept going back to thinking about killing her. So make sure you kick people out if you need to.
Yes.
And we actually, on our YouTube page, there's a video of Megan's birth, and you can actually see that moment where she looks over at her mother-in-law just before the baby's born. So yes, Megan, I remember that very, very clearly.
So yeah, and these are things you hold on to. These are the memories. Most people won't remember their entire birth from beginning to end, but they'll remember those little snippets and those pieces that they found helpful or that they found detrimental to the labor process. And we've already touched on that in previous episodes of making sure that the space that you're creating is a safe space for you and a space that you feel comfortable to be able to do what you need to do to get through your labor.
So Jill is talking about how important it is to manage fear before it all begins, or after labor begins, because it can cause one to hold back and make it feel worse.
I was going to say, and even slow things down.
It can slow things down for sure. Change of environment, or any kind of thing that can induce fear, and it can get in the way of the way our body uses those endorphins. So we talked in our last episode about our body's own endorphins that help us to manage discomfort, kind of like morphine. It's fantastic, but it competes with the fear hormones, adrenaline. We can't have the two of them working at the same time. They both have very different effects, opposite effects. So the adrenaline, and that is fear-based usually, that kind of flight, fright, or freeze, tenses us up, increases our blood pressure, increases our heart rate, and makes us much more irritable, for sure. Whereas the endorphins, give that kind of peaceful effect. And so it can be really hard with someone who's quite fearful to be able to get into that space and to use their body's own resources for comfort measures. And so talking about it can be good, and we've done that before. Sometimes when labors slow down or stall, we have the conversation. Is there anything that you're afraid of? Is there anything that you're worried about? To be able to try and work through those to allow your body to keep going.
Yeah, it can be really hard though during birth if you're deep in labor land to articulate sometimes when things are not going well in your own mind, so sometimes you can have a fear, sometimes you know exactly what it is, sometimes you might not even know exactly what it is you're afraid of, but you can be having fears, or even just made a transition from experiencing pain into having some sort of psychological suffering going on, but have a really hard time articulating that during birth. And it can be helpful to have talked about that beforehand with the people who will be supporting you, so that there's a plan in place. If this is not working for me and I can't be really articulate and explain what I need or what I want or why it's not okay, how can this be managed? And sometimes it's helpful to just have agreed in advance that something like help or I'm not okay, is what's going to happen, and then it's the responsibility of the people around you to figure out what we can change to make it better. There's a Ina May Gaskin quote that if a woman doesn't look like a goddess when she's giving birth, somebody's doing something wrong, and it's not the person giving birth. But it can be really hard to communicate that sometimes when you're in that labor land.
So when we as care providers, or as midwives, and I'm speaking for the three of us that are here, when we approach comfort measures and pain management with clients, we generally start with the least invasive types of pain management or comfort measures, which include those tips and tricks and tools of our trade that we carry with us, whether it be our hands, whether it be guidance, whether it be our words or massage or simply presence. There's a lot of research out there on just being present and how that can change somebody's experience of labor. And we start with these, and when they don't work, we'll move on to something else. And it might not, what we've suggested might not work for the whole entire labor. It might only work for that little piece of labor, and we'll come back to it. And it might be helpful later on down the road. And there are generally always more options available. And then as people are asking for more support, then we usually have other tools that we can use, including pharmacological pain management, which we're not going to get into in a lot of detail, but we'll constantly make suggestions and kind of help to get you through these times.
I was responding, Jill brought up fear, and I asked whether anybody had any suggestions about working through fear, and Ashley suggested that keeping in mind that it's constructive pain was helpful, or can be helpful. And I think that that's true, that if you that if you can remember, first of all, that this pain is going somewhere, that you're accomplishing something, that can be helpful. It can also be helpful to be reminded that this is not the rest of your life. Like you don't, this is not going to last forever. Because certainly when you are in the middle of it, it kind of feels like this is your new world and this is going to last forever. Isabel commented about fear that she felt really afraid when the baby's head was actually starting to come out because it hurt so much, and she felt guilty because she didn't want to push anymore. Now, having seen Isabel in the community recently, I know she works through that pain because the baby's head is not still coming out and she did push her baby out. And, you know, sometimes those moments of fear are going to wash over us, but not necessarily drown us, you know, that it can be worked through, and that moment of time can pass. So because I got paged right as we were going on, I don't know, did you, either of you talk about the evidence-based birth work?
No, so we mentioned it, but
Okay.
yeah,
but not
Okay.
by name.
you can take that.
Okay. So just a couple of other comments coming in here, and then I want to talk about that. So Tabitha said that she found it really helpful when I explained why, she says, I found it so helpful during my labor when Genia explained why I was feeling what I was feeling and what to expect to happen next. It definitely took away the fear I had because there weren't so many unknowns, for sure. Yeah, and the fear of what's coming next can be really intimidating, for sure. So we had planned on doing or having a lot of discussion about specific comfort measures, and then this morning I woke up and I had an email from Rebecca Decker of Evidence-Based Birth, which you can find at evidencebasedbirth.com, and Rebecca is a nurse with a PhD, and her passion and commitment is to bring research evidence to people who are having babies and translate that research into usable information that can inform the decisions that you make about the care that you receive and the choices that you make around pain management and many aspects of birth. And Rebecca is coming out right now with a series about pain management and comfort measures in childbirth, and she is going to break down the research around all kinds of different both pharmacological pain management options and also other non-pharmacological comfort measures. And I know she's going to do a great job because she does this really well. So again, evidencebasedbirth.com is her website. You can sign up to receive email notifications when she publishes new information. There's a podcast, a blog, and a YouTube channel. And we highly endorse her. So I will put that website in the comments of this video, and I strongly encourage you to sign up and receive notifications from her, because no doubt it will be very informative.
What else should we cover? So she'll go into depth about a lot of different things, and into the specifics. So we're not going to necessarily do that. And we've touched on some ways to prepare. So some of the things to think about as you're getting ready: prepare to move a lot in your labor. The suggestions that we give come from combined years and years of experience of supporting people through labor and birth, and so often it's good advice, and sometimes it's not. You know, sometimes people just don't want to get out of the space that they're in, and sometimes that space is a really they start creating a negative space for themselves. We can hear it in the doubt that they express about their ability to cope, or in ways that might be not necessarily helpful to the labor. So people getting into that, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And we know that changing your story can work. You have the ability to change your story to an extent, and kind of keeping out of the negativity and finding the positive things that are happening in the labor process and in the birth process, and sometimes that's just recognizing that the intensity and discomfort in your body is actually your body being incredibly strong, and so recognizing that power that we have in our bodies to be able to do this, to be able to birth babies, it's pretty remarkable. And we often help to suggest that, and because some people get into that cycle of I can't do this, I'm done, I can't do this, and it's just them talking themselves out of it, as opposed to physically not being able to do it. But there is a really fine line that we need to that we recognize as healthcare providers, and that most laboring people will recognize themselves. There's a fine line between pain and suffering, and suffering is something that we don't see often. But it generally is telling us that something needs to be changed, and so we will do everything we can to help stop that suffering.
And we don't always get it right. We can't always tell when somebody has transitioned from experiencing pain but working through it and coping with it to a point where they are suffering. And as I was saying earlier, it can be very hard to express that. But your care providers do want to know. And so having those conversations with your support people in advance around how am I going to communicate when I need help, when this is not okay, is really important, because some people are very clear in their communication during birth, and then other people look like they are perfectly zen and everything is going beautifully, and from an outsider, from an observer's perspective, the person is working through their experience really beautifully, but on the inside they're really struggling. So I think one of the things that can be really important, regardless of what kind of comfort measures you want or choose or are available to you during your birth, is have those conversations with the people that are going to be around you around how do I ask for help if it's just not okay, and it's hard to get that message out at the time.
I think the other thing, touching on what Jeannie is saying, is we've got a lot of, you can hit Google and the World Wide Web, and you can pull up lots of different kind of birth plans that will have very specific, I want this, I don't want this, I want this, I don't want this. And we see them sometimes, where I do not want an epidural, or I do not want any of these interventions. And one of the things I like to talk about earlier in the pregnancy is creating a birth plan that's really open to whatever needs to happen. Whether you've had 6 babies before or none at all, it's going to be a very different experience. And one of the things that breaks my heart as a midwife are comments after a birth, if somebody's chosen something they didn't originally want, somebody choosing an epidural, they feel disappointed in themselves, and they feel like they're disappointing their care providers, and that's just heartbreaking. We work to support women to make the choices that's right for them, and so coming into preparing for the big day with an open mind, and just being open to all of the options available, and so that you're going to have your baby the way you need to have your baby, whether it's at home, whether it's at hospital, whether it's by C-section. There are some things that we cannot control, but to walk away from your birth experience feeling empowered and positive, and that you were supported, is really the most important goal. It doesn't matter in the end if you choose to have an epidural 2 hours into your labor. That doesn't matter. That's your choice, and if you needed that to get through that moment, then great for making that choice and knowing what it is you need. And so we're able to have the conversations with our clients here in clinic about all of the benefits and risks of all of the different choices, but leaving that birth plan open to whatever is going to happen, whatever needs to happen in order to safely have a baby, and to try to minimize that trauma. And sometimes birth experiences can be traumatic. So that's a big piece of advice on my part. Anything else coming
Yeah,
through
just
the
to
pipes?
wrap up quickly. So, Kristen commented that one of the ways that she works through things was to acknowledge, wow, that was a really good one when they were strong, and to view each contraction as getting one contraction closer to seeing the baby. So viewing the pain as good and productive. And Isabel, who was afraid when the baby first started coming out, said, I basically told myself I didn't have a choice. And I had a lot of encouragement from the team and my partner, letting me know that I was so close. And that often is, really, really key. But at this point, we need to wrap it up.
Okay.
So evidencebasedbirth.com is where I would strongly encourage you to go for great information about all of the specific comfort measures that are available to you. If you would like a little tip sheet on comfort measures during birth, you can go to generationsmidwifery.ca/active labor, and there's a tip sheet available there. And if you have further or any questions or comments, please continue to comment in the video feed, and we will definitely be checking in there and getting back to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for tuning in. What are we covering next month? Hold on, next month is February already.
Home birth.
Home birth. Ooh, fun. If anyone has any questions or comments or anything to send in about home birth, we'll be covering likely what the research says, what home birth looks like. Maybe we'll have
healthcare is provided at home.
There you go. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions or knows of anyone out there who's thinking about a home birth and wants a bit more information, then send them our way. We'll be back next Thursday at approximately 10 o'clock.